Hey, Marijuana Nation. Unfortunately, we don't have a show today, nor will we tomorrow, as I'm taking some time off to do fun toddler stuff with my 4-year-old. We will be back in news action on Thursday. Instead, today I'm going to run a very cool episode of a new podcast I started producing at the start of the year that has nothing at all to do with cannabis. It's called Eat Well, Travel Often, and it's hosted by my friend Melissa Goldberg, whose husband Lewis you might know from our weekly podcast Marijuana Today, as well as the Green Rush podcast, which I also produce. I know I'm totally biased here, but Eat Well, Travel Often is a great show, and in this episode that you're about to hear, Melissa speaks with none other than Ralph Nader, famed activist, safety advocate, former presidential candidate, and the author of a new cookbook featuring recipes born of and inspired by his Lebanese heritage. You can tune into other episodes of Eat Well, Travel Often over at eatwelltraveloften.net and by searching Apple Podcasts and Stitcher for the title Eat Well, Travel Often. Just don't travel right now. Eat well, but yeah. Anyways, we'll be back with full shows on Thursday. So be safe, be well.
Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Often, a podcast about food, travel, the environment, mind, body, and spirit. I'm Melissa Goldberg, and over the course of my adult life, I've been focused on how to build an integrated community around food, health, wellness, and the environment. These are all related. Understanding these interrelationships helps us look at life as a holistic system and teaches us how to connect with each other to create a loving and thriving community. On Eat Well, Travel Often, I talk to farmers, foragers, cookbook authors, doctors, scientists, and entrepreneurs. All have one thing in common. The people I speak with are trying to better everyone's lives through their work and passion. These are the people who inspire me to be a better person. I hope to share with you my curiosity from everything from book to plate. And the goal of these conversations are to inspire you to eat well and travel often. For more than 50 years, Ralph Nader has been working to increase government and corporate accountability. His first book in 1965, Unsafe at Any Speed, was instrumental in forcing the auto industry to install seatbelts in cars. Ralph Nader's continuing advocacy has been instrumental in changing food policy. While Ralph Nader has been in the public eye for decades, what some of you might not know about him is his lifelong commitment to healthy eating and food. Born in Connecticut to Lebanese parents, Nader's appreciation of food began at an early age. His mother was on the forefront of the food movement. She banned processed foods from her home when processed wasn't even part of the American dialogue. In a New York Times article in 1991, Ralph's mother, Rose Nader, said, "If you eat healthy food, you nourish your body and your brain. When you eat junk food, you feel irritated and you don't know why. It's all in the food. It all goes together." And now, over 50 years after his first book, Ralph Nader has published a cookbook. The Ralph Nader and Family Cookbook shares the cuisine of Nader's upbringing with Lebanese dishes inspired by his mother's recipes. Take a listen to Ralph talk about what it's like for him growing up, his relationship to food, and how important it is to have safety laws in the food industry. I could have talked to him for hours, and it seemed he wasn't so quick to get off the podcast either. And his love for this cookbook really comes through in the interview. Stay through the end where I talk about the Ralph Nader and the Family Cookbook recipes details. One final note, some friends and family had a few words about the 2000 election when they found out I was going to interview Ralph Nader. Well, those who are still blaming Nader for Al Gore's presidential loss in 2000, it's time to stop using him as a scapegoat. If you look into the full analysis of votes, Nader's blame has been debunked. 308,000 Democrats voted for Bush in Florida. Half the registered Democrats failed to even vote, and Gore failed to win his home state of Tennessee, among many other factors. Furthermore, we live in a democratic society which gives us the right to vote for anyone who we believe best presents our values. Ralph Nader has been listed as one of the most influential figures in American history. As Mark Green, the former public advocate in New York City and one of the best-known progressive, states in an article in The Nation, if there had been no Ralph Nader, there probably would not have been a consumer rights and corporate accountability movement, or at least nothing remotely resembling the hundreds of organizations, laws, and books that have sprung from his initiative. Welcome. I'm really excited to be speaking to you about your new cookbook. You're a consumer advocate, and your first book came out, Unsafe at Any Speed, was published in 1965 about the auto industry. Now, over 50 years later, you published your first cookbook. What inspired you to do this?
Well, because after I took on the auto companies and we got life-saving legislation through Congress, I became involved in the food safety movement. And we worked on the meat and poultry inspection laws in the late 1960s and almost got the fish inspection law through, but it was blocked by the industry. And I would testify before Congress and write articles, Ladies' Home Journal and other publications, on the need for safer food preservation, safer food marketing, safer food labels, and the whole range of inspection at the source in terms of non-reckless use of pesticides and herbicides in the fields, all the way to the processing plants or the industrial agriculture, packed chickens and pigs together, and all the things we know about now. And in the process, the reporters would call me up and say, well, what did you eat when you were growing up? And I said, well, why don't you call my mother? She'll tell you what recipes we were eating off of. But I would give preliminary answers. This would go on year after year. And so, I thought this would be a good time to comprehensively address that inquiry because in the meantime, the Mediterranean diet has risen to the top in the estimation of nutritionists around the world as the most diversified and nutritious diet of any area of the world, whether it's Far East or Europe cuisine. And that made a book like this even more important, I think. And as a result, a lot of things fell into place, and I can go into them one after the other if you'd like. The recipes are very easy to use, and they have flexibility for judgment. They're mostly my mother's recipes, and she always liked to call recipes use your own judgment recipes. So if you don't like coconut in the 222 cookies, you can take it out and you still have good 222 cookies. So she wanted to give people that kind of flexibility. And the second thing is they're full of ingredients that are available in your local grocery or supermarket. They're not exotic ingredients. Probably the hardest thing to get may be pine nuts, but otherwise they're vegetables and fruits largely. It's pretty minimal on meat. It really doesn't have much beef or no pork. Has some fish, some lamb, and in that sense, it's easy. And the ingredients are inexpensive. I mean, we're not talking about prime rib here, or sirloin steaks. They're really pretty expensive because it's heavy on fruits and vegetables and nuts and available condiments and the like. So I thought it was good to convey all that.
The Mediterranean diet that you focus on, can you talk about what's the core of this diet?
Yeah, the core is vegetables and fruits. For example, there's a lot in the book that has legumes in it. They have beans, cannellini beans, lentils. So that's one. And the salads are heavy with tomatoes, scallions, parsley, Swiss chard salad, things like that. Of course, olive oil is used throughout. There's almost no butter. And the famous chickpeas with hummus, which is now pretty well established throughout our country. And eggplant is my favorite. The recipe for what's called shaykh al-mehshi on page 46. A baked eggplant stuffed with lemon pine nuts. So you see, you have a lot of that, and onions, a lot of use of garlic. Not as much as Korean cuisine, but pretty heavy on garlic, lemon. And then there's a plentiful use of tofu and kale. And there's not much sugar, salt, and fat density here. That's another reason why the Mediterranean diet is touted by the best nutritionists, is that it obviously has those ingredients, but nothing like, say, fast food restaurants have in the U.S.
Your mother and father, I assume, shaped your view on food. And in the book, you said she never served hot dogs at home because she didn't trust anything she didn't know about. How did that? She seems like the original consumer advocate because she wanted to, have everything out in the open and know what's there. How did that shape your advocacy? Like, did you have discussions about this at the dinner table?
All the time. We never whined. We were taught not to whine at all. That we ate what they ate what we ate, and that was the end of it. You cleaned your dish out. It was considered not good practice to leave anything on the dish, and there was time for conversation. Instead of hurry up, eat your vegetables, eat your radish. There wasn't any of that. They generically took that off the table, so to speak. Yeah, well, the big lesson that my mother taught me was if you don't know what's in the food, and secondarily, if you don't know where it comes from, you should be very skeptical. So the hot dog fit that set of Jeremiah's very well. I mean, we didn't know what was in. Later on, when I was involved in the food safety movement, it turned out that the average hot dog had over 30% fat and a whole series of things that, including debris and things that were not good for you. And it had low nutrition. And it had additives that were not adequately tested, color additives and preservatives. And that's why she would never have hot dogs in our dinner table.
I read in a New York Times article in 1977, your mother said food is a way of communicating, a way of teaching. So did she not only teach you about food at the dinner table? I mean, what were your conversations like?
Well, as I say in the introduction, Melissa, the best lesson she taught us was that little interaction when I was 8 years old with her. It's on page 9, and I was pushing aside a dish of celery, radishes, and carrots, fresh. That was like to start the meal, and I said, I don't want that. And she said, well, now eat your food, Ralph. It's very good for you. And I said, I don't like that. And she said, well, they'll make you stronger. And appealed to my desire to be the fastest runner in my class. And that didn't work. And I said, I didn't want to eat it. Well, this was unusual in our family, that this kind of rebellion. And then the rest of it is classic, I think, how she got me thinking. I can describe it if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Love to hear it.
After a triple rejection, which was pretty rare in our family, she really didn't believe in coercion. Like, you better eat it now, or it's good for you. She never did that. She always looked at it as a learning experience, and so she leaned over the table and said, "Ralph, when you say I don't like or I don't want to eat, who's I?" So I was sort of flustered. It's me, Ralph. And she said, "Well, I'm not sure, son. Could I be your heart, your lungs, your liver, your kidney that are saying no?" And that time I didn't know what she was getting at. And then she said, "Ralph, I think I know who I is." And I said, "Who?" And she smiled and said, "I's your tongue, which you have turned against your brain. Now eat so you can grow up healthy." Well, I did that, of course, because I knew what was coming was the usual tasty and delicious meal. But what a way to teach. I mean, it was, I mulled that over for years, and I would relate that to parents of young kids. Because one of the biggest problems at the dinner table in families forever, it seems, in whatever culture, is getting the kids to accept the food and not just say if it doesn't taste good, they don't like it, because it may be very nutritious, but it didn't matter. It didn't taste good. And especially now with the fast food industry over 70 years cultivating kids' tongues so they literally react to the additives that are in the food and not to the natural taste of the food. And so, for example, kids today would not like a plain old-fashioned soup. They would want, the kind of soup that has additives in it and give it its distinctive taste, which is amazing appropriation of the taste buds of tens of millions of kids.
Sorry, it's like, I think I read you said that the food industry is devastating the integrity of our food. They're basically turning kids into what they don't even know how to taste anymore because they're not tasting the true food.
Yeah, that's true. My mother used to say that if food is nutritious, it's likely to be delicious. And I would say, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, it retains its flavor. But if you have a rubberized tomato coming in from, Mexico, days and days from its harvest, it's not only lost its taste, it's lost its nutrition." And the fast food industry decided long ago that it would direct market to kids on kid television, and it would market sugar and salt and fat, mostly sugar, but they put the salt and fat in. It's hard to advertise fat to kids. And so the consumption per capita of the children of sugar, fat, and salt skyrocketed. And that led to, one, wanting to nag their parents for the kind of junk food that's all over the country's marketing now, and also to introduce a huge obesity epidemic. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't think 2-3% of the kids would be considered obese, and now it's between 25 and 30%, and that means diabetes, young people's diabetes. It means predilection for high blood pressure, other cardiovascular diseases coming in early adulthood. I mean, we have a real physical disaster here. Physical health has been going on and documented for years, and Michelle Obama was talking about it. And before that, the Center for Science and the Public Interest. And there's nothing new about it except that starting in the 1980s with huge portions, that's when they basically doubled the amount in a cheeseburger. You can hardly get your teeth around it. And a real cranking up of heavily sugared cereals where, half of the cereal was basically sugar and salt, etc. And the obesity epidemic took off. Now, this is a huge source of mortality and morbidity in terms of later life. And just think of the psychological problems of these kids, going to school and they're so overweight and they can't play with the other kids, and has devastating psychological effects. So I think this book and its introduction and the little nuggets of advice throughout is very timely.
There are over 50 or so recipes in a book, and I assume you love them all. But do you have a favorite?
Yeah, my favorite is a dish that most people don't know about, unlike hummus, for example, or lentil soup. It's on page 46, if you have it, Melissa.
I do.
Shaykh al-Mahshi, and it's baked eggplant stuffed with lamb, pine nuts, and tomatoes, and sometimes sprinkled with a little parsley. It's just fabulous. I would have it on my birthday. When I was a kid, my mother would say, "What do you want? Well, you want a cake or pumpkin pie or something?" I want Shaykh al-Mahshi.
It's actually, my husband put a Post-it right on that page of that recipe. He's like, "You got to make this."
Yeah, well, it tastes better than it reads, actually. It's so juicy.
How often do you cook?
Well, I cook some of the basics. I cook burghul. I cook lentils sometimes. But I am so busy, in Congress and in Washington, and this nightmare $2.2 trillion bill with open sesame to Trump's people and so on. And I don't have that much time. So, we have an extended family and they have their own favorite recipes and they cook. And the nice thing about this is you can cook for several days. I mean, you can make lentils in a variety of ways. And you can make hummus and soups. So it isn't like you have to cook every day. So that's the nice thing about these recipes. They do hold their nutrition and taste longer than a lot of fast food recipes, which degrade very quickly.
I saw that your the apple cake or the apple pie, it serves 20 people. So that would last a very long time in my house.
That's like for Thanksgiving. Yeah. Well, you could make it for less, obviously. But I think, if you look at all the recipes, almost everything is very easy to get in food stores and quite inexpensive. That's what's nice about it. And French cuisine sometimes really difficult, to learn the recipes. And the other thing that's nice about this cuisine is it doesn't require all that many pots and pans, which is not a minor consideration these days.
Right. So, we can't avoid what's going on in the world right now. And the coronavirus has forced millions of people to shelter in place and stay inside. I would assume this has made many people who have never cook inside, start cooking. Do you have tips on something that they can do, make things more tasty, or the best ways to shop right now?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you raised that because the book now has contemporary relevance as well. And you hear all kinds of guidelines for the coronavirus from the Centers for Disease Control and so on. I've yet to hear, just because, it's not, food isn't considered a pharmaceutical, but I've yet to hear the most common sense, which is, look, keep your nutritional levels up. There's no downside. It's going to improve your immunity if you ever get it. Then if you have, an extended period of time where you're eating Toasted Twinkies and hot dogs and sugared cereal. And so it does have a relevance for that. And, since people are going to spend a lot of time at home, it gives them an opportunity to learn a simple but extremely beneficial cuisine. And then, in answer to your question as well, like most people may not like broccoli. George Herbert Walker Bush famously said he didn't like broccoli. But just look, once you steam broccoli with garlic, lemon, and olive oil, it is fabulous. I mean, you wouldn't think you're eating broccoli, but you are eating broccoli, and broccoli is good for you. It's one of the most studied, along with garlic, food products in terms of being beneficial to health. So use of garlic, lemon, olive oil, things like mint, is a way to expand your routine acceptance of certain vegetables and other categories where, for years you've just automatically taken them off the table, so to speak. As people do get in tremendous routines in what they like and what they don't like. I remember when I was working in my parents' restaurant as a young person. I was behind the counter, and I served on tables after I graduated from being a dishwasher. And right across the street of this little town, Main Street, was a huge textile factory. I think they had about 400 workers. And they would come over, during lunch break or whatever. And I was amazed at how perfectly repetitive their choices were. Weeks, months would go. They would come in the door, and I'd be able to tell the cook before they even sat down what they wanted. And this book allows people to diversify their cuisine in a very, very delicious and nutritious manner, and easy cooking manner, and inexpensive manner.
It's funny that you say about, garlic and, saute the broccoli with garlic. I run a community-supported agriculture group. I've been running it for 13 years. And anytime there's a vegetable that my members don't know what it is, they say, how do I cook it? I'm like, saute it with little garlic, olive oil. You'll like it. Like, that's the,
It brings out the taste.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it right now, in terms of the food supply chain, how concerned are you about? I mean, you're on the inside now. You know what's going on. Is there anything that we should be doing to help support this? Should we be worried? What should people be doing?
Well, if they're able to, they should be contributing to food pantries and soup kitchens in their community, because the people who are deep in poverty are very, very vulnerable now. And the second is they should be pleased that it looks like a good planting season at least for the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic states, because there's almost a perfect regularity of light rain interspersed by sunshine. We haven't had much snow, and when you don't have much snow, you may not have enough spring water, and it may be precursor to drought. But instead of the snow, we've had rain, certainly in New England, and that's very important because you got to keep the supply of food coming off the farms. And then the third thing is be very wary of certain ingredients being in short supply. And I'm not talking about paper products. I'm talking about there may be a run on onions, for example. But what's nice about these recipes is you can have certain things short in supply, but unlike the China-U.S. supply chain, or that we get our swabs mostly from a factory that dominates the market in Italy, and we're running short on swabs, and if you don't have swabs, you can't have testing. There are a lot of alternatives here where the availability is quite plentiful. There are some seasonal shortage problems, like you can't always get eggplant, and you have to be aware of when they are more available and less available. But by and large, You don't have to engage in heavy hoarding to get some of the basic recipes in this book.
Do you think that farms are going to have worker shortages because of the borders being shut down because of the virus?
Yeah, unless there's an agreement with people in, unless there's agreement with Mexico and Central America. I would be curious to see how Canada does it, because Canada has had a very efficient migrant seasonal permit, unlike the chaotic U.S. system. And I would try to learn from Canada. We don't learn enough from Canada. They had universal health care, daycare, home health care. What are they, smarter than us? Maybe they're more
I think we don't
more
learn
demanding than us.
Right. I don't think we learn enough from anybody. But
that's true. Well, we all grew up, didn't we, Melissa? And the one thing drummed into our heads, America's number one. It's not number one in a whole series of indicators, including wages. And the only place that's clearly number one is incarcerated people per capita.
Right. So you have been...
That hasn't been raised yet, the migrant worker. However, with these trillions pouring out, they may subsidize farmer workers. They may subsidize the growers.
Right. Well, the farmer that I work with for my CSA, his workers have been coming up from Guatemala every year for the season, and he can't get them into the country right now.
Yeah, because now, Trump has another excuse that even if they want to come, he'll say, well, they've got the disease. Although we now are leading the world in accelerated infections. Oh, it's a real problem. Who can predict all the variables? But you can do a lot with subsidies, Companies love subsidies.
They love, but the small, these small organic farmers really don't get what these big conglomerate farmers get.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
So you've
that's
been
true.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, there is such a huge difference, isn't there, between the great big growers in California that have gotten subsidized water and other kinds of price supports, and your neighborhood organic farmer. That may be the savior, that there'll be more gardens. Already there's a run on seeds. Have you read about that?
I read it. Well, I know that the farmer that I work with, he orders seeds. He can get them the next day, and they're now like a week or two out. And I hear there's also a run on people buying baby chicks.
Yeah, that's right. There's an article on that in the New York Times. Yeah. Well, in a way, that's encouraging because, in World War II, when Franklin Roosevelt urged people over the radio to start victory gardens, listen to this figure. It's amazing. 20 million victory gardens cropped up. And at one point in the peak, like in 1944, 40% of vegetables were produced by those gardens.
That's amazing. And now most kids don't even know where their food comes from.
They don't know what a garden is. I mean, it's terrible. So many kids grow up on asphalt and concrete, and they don't know what soil is. You know that New York Times summer program for poor kids? When, they go to rural areas for 2-3 weeks.
Uh-huh.
And I once read a story they wrote about it, and one of the immediate reactions of the 9-year-old was that she had never had her feet on soil before.
That's scary. I know with my kids, we've been having a garden, and I've been doing this CSA, and it took a while. When they were little, they didn't understand. And as they started eating food right off the plant, they were like, wow. And, they've grown up with it and they understand where food is. But most kids don't understand it. And they think it comes from the shelf and it's a box of cereal or it's a, bag of chips or McDonald's. And, I hope that what's going on, maybe will open people's eyes and understand that, right now they're looking at the nurses and the doctors are the lifeline, but the farmers are the lifeline of everybody.
Well, that's why, that's a commentary on our educational system's failure, isn't it? My sister, several years ago, started a baking project for fifth graders, and it was spectacularly successful. She had someone come up from Southern Connecticut and explain all about how the wheat is grown, and with pictures and all. And then they learned how to bake their bread. And when the bread came out of the oven in the school cafeteria, they were so proud to take it home, because they don't make things anymore. They just look at screens, and it was spectacular. The only reason it ended is because, ironically, they replaced that part of the kitchen with a computer room. How about that? See? So, and then when the kids are taken on little tours, in Washington, they take them to National Airport, look at the planes. Well, they should take them on tours to farms. There are some farms in Virginia that encourage tours. I mean, they regular tours. Where are you located, Melissa?
I'm in New Jersey.
Oh, so yeah, the Garden State, right?
Well, the farmer that I work with, he does volunteer days and people can go out and help them pick. And I always try to bring my kids out there and bring the family out there so they can understand how it's really hard work. And this is where your food comes from. And, it just doesn't come from the shelf in the supermarket.
And have them pick. Sometimes, the farmers will let people pick blueberries or whatever and keep them. And that's a good experience for kids. Do you know about the work at Center for Science and the Public Interest? It's a group I helped start in Washington. Mike Jacobson ran it.
I do, but why don't you tell everybody about it?
Yeah. Well, when I got into the whole food situation in Washington in the late 60s, I wanted a scientist. And so I went to MIT to recruit and had a whole bunch of PhD candidates, et cetera, come one after other in the interview room. And along came Michael Jacobson. And to this day, I remember he was getting his degree in biochemistry. And he didn't just want to go into the food processing industry where he develops the latest whip for some bakery product. And I said to him, Mike, this is serious business here. We don't want you just to come for a year. It's got to be in the long run. And he said, I'm in it for the long run. 50 years later, more than 50 years later, he's still there. He's the chief scientist now. He stepped down from being the executive director. And his work was spectacularly successful. I credit him with changing the diets of about 40 million people. He would go on the Mike Douglas show, the Phil Donahue show with me. He'd show all the fat in the vial from the recipe for cheeseburger from McDonald's, and people would gasp. And he started this newsletter, which I hope you're getting. It's the best in the field. It's called Nutrition Action. And it's so colorful and explicit and non-obscure language that it's good for kids, too, once they hit 10 years old or so. And at one time he had almost 1 million circulation. It's called Nutrition. Are you familiar with that?
I am actually not familiar, but I am going to sign up today.
Oh, yeah. No, it's really great. It comes out every month. And, of course, their website elaborates it. But here's a tremendous success story, which unfortunately never gets written up in the New York Times or Washington Post because they didn't indulge in bad or outrageous behavior. And he got the FDA to be more respectful with food labeling, and he got some hazardous additives off because he had a litigating capability. But it's mostly as an educator reaching millions of people. Unfortunately, the degrading of our media culture is such that all these programs are no longer around. Donahue's no longer around. Mike Douglas, Merv Griffin. Well, they all had a lot of entertainment, but they always had time for serious topics because they were afraid of, for one thing, not Donahue, but the others were afraid of the FCC cracking down because they didn't meet the minimal standards of the Public Interest, Convenience, and Necessity in the 1934 Communications Act. All that's totally gone now.
There are no standards anymore.
No standards. Can't even get on Sirius radio anymore. They're gone. Larry King would, reach 10, 15 million people. And there would be local. The only one left is Brian Lehrer, for WNYC. They're all gone now. Boston, LA, Chicago. Anyway, I hope this book fits in. We're getting some early interest. Unfortunately, all the signings and everything have been canceled with Barnes and Noble. And however, we just got word the New York Times has this TV for food, and they have some sort of blog and they're interested. But you'll be one of the earliest ones. You want me to tell you an Oprah story?
Of course, why not?
Okay, when Oprah was in Baltimore, just getting underway, one day I got a frantic call from her, and she said, "Ralph, I'm Oprah Winfrey on the show in Baltimore, and I just got my lead guest canceled. Can you come?" And I said, "Well, let me check and see in my schedule." And I checked, and I called her back, and I said, "Yeah, I can come. I'll be there in a couple hours." And so I came and I filled in for her. And I was on her program in Chicago just once. She had a panel of people, well-known people talking about their mothers. And she remembered that in the green room. She said, "I remember when you came out, you rescued me that one day." That's my Oprah story.
That's great. So I've taken up a lot of your time, and I really appreciate it. And I love this book, and I'm gonna go this week and cook some recipes from it. And I hope it does really well. And I have to say that I, along with many people, really appreciate all the work that you have done over the years to advocate for us. And in so many ways, I mean, from food to consumer goods to everything, we need more Ralph Naders in the world
to help us get through.
I can second that one. This is, the food industry keeps coming back. You just think you've straightened them out on certain things, and they keep, turning the corner on you. And I hope there are more Mike Jacobsons, and I hope more young people. They are stepping up, as you know, with these gardens and these CSAs, what you're calling the connection with the family farmers, and a lot of young people are starting farms close to cities, and all that is encouraging, but, you have to look at what the young generation is eating. And now, as you know, Trump has opened the floodgates to junk food into school lunch programs. That's another one. He has a list of everything Obama did, and he wants to reverse it in a kind of Captain Queeg, Captain Ahab manner. He's occupationally insane. I can elaborate that, but he is occupationally insane, and it's seriously damaging the quality of the food supply.
Yeah, well, every American needs to remember this in November and get out and vote, because that's the only thing that we can do is, vote him out of office. And
we're looking at 105 million people who are non-voters coming up, and so you get 10 million people in 6 states who are non-voters voting, and he's history.
Yes. So.
Yeah. By the way, it's not just my mother's recipes. We have a few other recipes. The chef of this new Mediterranean restaurant, New James, that's been rated top Mediterranean restaurant in Connecticut And he has a couple recipes. Sister has a recipe. Nephew has a recipe. And also, it does have what I think is some good family advice for young parents. I think that's an important part of the book. It's written in the introduction and sometime interspersed. So that's, reflects the memory of my mother, which is food is more than food. It's upbringing.
And it's community.
It's community, it's upbringing, it's good conversation around the dinner table instead of grumpy kids looking at their iPhone.
Right.
Old-fashioned in a way.
My family, we have a rule. There's no phones at the table. There's no electronics. We sit there, we talk, and we communicate. And that's, it's the way to be. And one thing about this virus is I think it's bringing families together. We're stuck at home and, we have to sit down at the table and talk to each other and do puzzles and be together.
Oh, for sure. It may create new tensions because they're not used to being cooped up. But on the other hand, fear sometimes produces a sense of cohesion in families, obviously, and that's beneficial. How old are your kids?
13 and 16.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and we've been cooking every night. Last night, my son says, I want to make this. And he said, I want to make Pop-Tarts. I'm like, Pop-Tarts? We don't even buy Pop-Tarts. And he's like, well, I saw this video. And we sat and we made the dough last night and we stuffed them and,
That's nice. That's nice. And it just reminds me, some of the ingredients here you can glean if you're living in a rural area. Some farms, they have mint that they don't use. They have grape leaves that they don't use. And some of the more outward families tend to take the family on a trip up the road and around the corner and across the brook, and they see a farm whose farmer they know, and they teach the kids how to, in a simple way, harvest.
Yes, it's a great thing to do. So, well, thank you so much. I know you're busy. Is there one last thing you want to tell everybody about the cookbook, or?
Yeah, I just think it's a perennial compendium of nutritious, delicious foods that you can get easily the ingredients inexpensively, and you don't have to fear about complex recipes. And there's a lot of good advice for parents with young kids throughout. And it will reduce a lot of aggravation at the dinner table if you set certain standards and rules right at the beginning, as we mentioned earlier in the interview. Are you part of the blog or whatever it is of Oprah with your
No, I'm not. I would love to be.
Oh, okay. So you're like an independent podcast?
Yes, it's an independent podcast, correct.
Oh, good. When did you start it?
I actually started it in January because I wanted a way to teach people about food and travel and different cookbooks, and I talked to different farmers and public health advocates, just to people who I think are inspiring and doing good, just so other people can learn about things that are out there.
Good. It's going well?
It is. Yes, it's going well. Yes, it is going well. And I'm learning every day.
Anyway, call anytime, Melissa. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And be safe and be well.
Well, Bob. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And now we are at the Book to Plate segment of Eat Well, Travel Often podcast. Here, I report back to you my personal experience. It could be a cookbook I cook from, a restaurant I ate at, even a place I recently visited. If you have any suggestions, please reach out to me. The Ralph Nader and Family Cookbook was inspired partly by his work with food safety laws, partly by the response to a 1991 collection of recipes that his parents compiled, and the growing popularity of Arab cuisine backed by scientific research that the Mediterranean diet is about the healthiest in the world. 2 recipes in the book were contributed by Chef George Nujam, who runs a bistro in Nader's hometown in Connecticut. The book is split up into 6 sections: appetizers and dips, soups and 1 smoothie, salads, main dishes, vegetables, and bread and dessert. Most ingredients can be found in general supermarkets, and the dishes are easy to prepare. Recipes include hummus and baba ganoush, garlic soup, Swiss chard salad, siki a la machi, Ralph's favorite, which is baked eggplant stuffed with lamb and pine nuts, and desserts like apple cake and rice pudding. At the bottom of the table of contents is written, "You are urged to purchase organically certified food whenever possible." Yes, I love that. Ralph Nader gave me permission to share some of the recipes on the Eat Well, Travel Often website. Try them out and report back on how they came out. Link to purchase book will also be in the show notes. Wow, that was so cool. I am still elated from that interview. Thank you, Ralph Nader, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk to me. You are responsible for so many important consumer protections: the Motor Vehicle Safety Laws, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Pure Food Act, the Clean Water Act, OSHA, EPA, Consumer Product Safety Commission, the National Highway Traffic Safety Commission, the recalls of millions of defective motor vehicles, access to government information through the Freedom of Information Act, and many lives saved. Everyone, if you like this episode or any of my other episodes, please rate and subscribe in Apple Podcasts. Check out my website, eatwelltraveloften.net, where you can find all the show notes. Please email me at melissa@eatwelltraveloften.net with any comments or recommendations. And please follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Eat Well Travel Often Podcast. Be safe, be healthy, and eat well and travel often. Just as you know, not right now. And please, stay safe and inside.